Young woman risks her life to save dying lion from crocodile-infested swamp. What the lion did next shocked the world. The savanna in the dry season stretched out like a sun-scorched tapestry, endless and unforgiving. Hot winds scorched the skin, red dust clouded the air, and not a single cloud offered shade from the merciless sun. Every step across the cracked earth echoed with the brittle crunch of drought, a land where only the resilient survived. In the midst of this harsh landscape, a lone figure moved slowly through the tall, yellowing grass. Emma, a 26-year-old graduate student from the U.S., was conducting a solo field survey, part of a volunteer project aimed at preserving Africa's wild lion population. While most of her peers were busy in high-tech labs, Emma had chosen one of the world's toughest environments to live side by side with nature. From a young age, Emma had been captivated by the wild. While other kids watched cartoons, she pored over wildlife picture books, reading about predators, food chains, and instinctual behaviors that humans could only observe from afar. Growing up in a modern city, she never had the chance to experience the wilderness firsthand. But that dream never faded. The curious little girl had grown into a determined biologist. Her mission on this journey, to document lion hunting behavior during the peak of the dry season, when food was scarce and survival instincts ruled. She carried night vision cameras, a field journal, and a deep sense of respect for every creature she encountered along the way. That morning, as usual, Emma was up long before dawn. She had chosen to survey the southern swamp, a place most research teams avoided due to its treacherous terrain, deep mud, and the lurking threat of aquatic predators. But Emma knew it was often in the most inaccessible places that nature revealed its rarest, most extraordinary moments. She moved carefully toward the marsh, each step crunching softly over dry grass. The air was strangely still. The breeze whispered through the reeds like the murmurs of the earth itself. Then, cutting through the silence, a sound, faint, fragile, but unmistakable. A soft, broken whimper, like the last breath of something barely clinging to life. Emma froze. Her ears perked up. She turned her head, listening again. The sound returned, fleeting and faint, then vanished, as if swallowed whole by the surrounding quiet. Eat. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't a predator. It was shaky, trembling, like a cry for help from something struggling in silence. Holding her breath, Emma moved slowly toward the edge of the swamp, careful not to make a sound. The closer she got, the clearer the noises became. Soft splashes, faint bubbling. None of it was good. She crouched, parted a thick clump of grass, and froze. There, just a few feet away, was a tiny lion cub, caked in mud and flailing helplessly in the shallow waters of the swamp. Emma's body tensed like a drawn bow. She didn't blink, her eyes locked on the scene before her. The cub couldn't have been more than 8 months old. Mud coated its fur, and one of its hind legs was swollen and red, likely sprained or torn on a hidden rock. Each time it tried to stand, its own weight sent it collapsing face first into the cold, sticky mire. But it wasn't the injury that made Emma's blood run cold. Just a few meters away, the water rippled, gentle waves spreading in fan-like patterns. Beneath the murky surface, long, dark shapes glided silently forward. They were just seconds away. Crocodiles. Not just 1, 3, maybe 4. Surrounding the cub, closing in like they'd been waiting all morning for this exact moment. What they smelled wasn't just the blood from an open wound. It was the scent of a royal feast. The king of beasts brought low. Emma shuddered. Her first instinct screamed, "Run! Get away!" She was just a researcher. No weapon, no training for this kind of encounter. But then, the cub let out another faint cry, softer this time. Not the fierce roar you'd expect from a lion, but a trembling, desperate whimper, almost a plea. Emma clenched her fists. She knew she couldn't just stand there. There wasn't much time. She backed up a few steps and pulled a small emergency whistle from her hip pocket, the kind designed to emit a high-frequency pitch that animals often interpret as a warning. She raised it to her lips and blew hard. A sharp, piercing shriek sliced through the still air, like a blade through fabric. The dark shapes beneath the surface froze. They veered slightly, instincts kicking in, pausing to reassess, but only for a second. "Not enough," Emma muttered. She needed movement, a real threat. She quickly gathered a few nearby stones, just heavy enough to make a splash, light enough to throw. The first one sailed over the marsh, landing with a loud plop about 6 feet from the crocodiles. Bubbles rose. Heads emerged. Pale green eyes scanned the area. One crocodile shifted direction. The second stone hit closer. This time, 2 of them turned toward the disturbance, slowly gliding forward. Emma seized the moment like it was her last breath. She dropped her backpack, quickly tied her camera strap to a nearby branch. Whistle in one hand, stone in the other, she crept toward the muddy bank. Each step made her heart pound harder. The muck was slippery, sucking at her boots up to the ankles, but she didn't stop. Only a few more feet. Then she saw it. The cub had noticed her. And the strangest thing happened. It didn't thrash or snarl. It simply lay there, eyes wide open, gaze locked on hers, as if it had been waiting. Emma reached out. Not far enough. She took another step into the shallow water. The muddy slush swallowed her legs up to the knees. A chill raced down her spine. She was now within striking distance if the crocodiles turned back. "Please don't move." "Okay," she whispered, as if speaking to both herself and the cub. Then, with one desperate lunge, she grabbed the scruff of the lion cub's neck with both hands and pulled hard. The cub whimpered but didn't resist. Still, it was heavier than she'd expected, soaked, caked in mud, and frozen with fear. Behind her, the water churned. One of the crocodiles had turned. It was headed straight for her. Emma yanked again, then again, until finally the cub slid up onto the higher ground, and she tumbled after it. Both of them collapsed onto the wet grass. A loud whack cracked behind her, the crocodile's tail slamming into the muddy bank. If she'd been 2 seconds slower... Emma gasped for air, her sweat mixing with mud, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She looked back. The crocodile had stopped at the water's edge, unwilling to climb onto solid land. But its pale, unblinking eyes stayed fixed on her and the cub. She didn't wait. Emma laid the cub onto a waterproof cloth, quickly wrapped a strap around its body, not too tight, just enough to keep it steady. Then, cradling it in one arm and using a walking stick with the other, she began the nearly 2-mile trek back to camp under the scorching 100-degree sun. Every step was a battle. The cub wasn't heavier than a 20-pound sack of rice, but with its labored breathing, injured limb, and mud-soaked body, it felt like she was carrying the weight of the world. Sweat poured down her back. The sunlight blurred her vision. But she didn't stop. "Just make it to camp. Just get there." The words played on repeat, the only thing keeping her focused. She couldn't afford to think about the rules, the ones that said humans weren't allowed to interfere with nature's course. She couldn't think about the legal risks or the judgmental stares of senior researchers. All she could feel was the fragile heartbeat of the little creature resting against her chest. And those eyes she knew she'd never forget. 2 hours later, Emma returned to camp. All eyes turned to her, soaked, caked in mud, and cradling a living lion cub. Someone screamed. Someone grabbed the radio. Others rushed over with questions flying. But Emma said nothing. She simply sat down on the steps of the medical hut and gently laid the cub onto the cloth. Tension gripped the entire research station. Emma sat at the conference table, still bearing the exhaustion of a life-or-death rescue on her face. In her hands was a hastily prepared legal document, an emergency petition. She was doing something no other graduate student had ever attempted here, formally requesting permission to temporarily care for a wild lion cub, fully accepting all responsibility. Some experts objected. They argued that interfering with natural survival violated core research ethics. But Emma didn't flinch. She didn't plead with emotion. Instead, she cited provisions from the International Wildlife Rescue Act. She presented data, the extent of the injuries, the near-zero chance of survival if left behind. Then she ended with a single, quiet sentence. "I didn't save him out of pity. I saved him because it was the right thing to do." 3 days later, the petition was temporarily approved. Emma was given an isolated observation room next to the veterinary unit and was officially assigned as the cub's recovery supervisor. She named him Leo, after the lion, of course, but also for the Latin meaning light. In the beginning, Leo barely moved. He lay still, eyes half open, quietly watching the unfamiliar world around him. But one thing surprised everyone. He wasn't afraid of Emma. When she wiped the mud from his head, he didn't flinch. When she cleaned his wounds, he closed his eyes, breathing softly, as if her hands were already familiar. By the second week, Leo began eating hand-prepared meat porridge. By the third, he tried to stand, wobbly but determined. By the fourth, he could manage a few small, clumsy runs in the enclosed grass yard. But the real change wasn't physical. It was in his eyes. Every time Emma walked in, Leo would turn his head. That deep golden gaze followed her, not with fear or instinctual caution like other wild lions, but with something that looked a lot like trust. Time passed quickly. One late afternoon, after a routine health check, the veterinary team delivered the news. Leo was fully recovered. No more concerning injuries. He was strong enough for the wild, ready to rejoin his kind. Emma stood still, saying nothing. She didn't step forward. She just watched Leo, peaceful, unaware. She wondered if he could feel it, the change in the air. Probably not. Only she knew what was coming, that their time together was almost over, and she wasn't ready to let go. A few days later, Leo was released. The truck door opened. He stepped out slowly, not timid, not rushed. And before disappearing into the tall grass, he turned around and looked at Emma. That look said everything words couldn't. Emma didn't call after him. She didn't reach out. She just stood there, silent, and let Leo return to where he belonged. Emma never forgot the savannah. 10 years had passed. She'd traveled the world, from biology conferences in Europe to conservation missions in the Amazon. And though she often stood before hundreds of people, introduced as a renowned conservationist, she always knew in her heart the beginning of it all was the savannah and Leo. She didn't go back right away. Partly because of work, but mostly because she was afraid. Afraid that if she returned, Leo would be gone, or worse, still alive, but no longer remembered her. But fate has its own timing. In June, at the peak of the dry season, Emma returned to the savannah as part of an international survey team studying the rewilding of the western lion population. 6 people, specialized off-road vehicles, satellite communications, a packed itinerary. But nature doesn't care about schedules. That afternoon, the wind shifted. The sky was clear, but the sunlight turned strange, sharp and golden, as if filtered through fine dust. Emma recognized it instantly. "Sandstorm?" she whispered. Before they could turn back, it struck like a silent, invisible wall. No warning, no signs. In seconds, the sky turned a thick, choking brown. Sand swarmed like a hive of angry bees, blotting out the windshield. Visibility vanished. The wind howled through every crevice, dust creeping into lungs, making it impossible to breathe deeply. The driver squinted, trying to steer clear of large rocks, but the tires began to lose grip. Gusts slammed the vehicle like giant invisible hands trying to toss it off a cliff. Voices were lost in the roar of the wind. Here, nature didn't need to rage to be cruel. A change in wind direction was enough to remind humans of their fragility. Then, an impact, like the earth itself had given up holding them. The vehicle skidded, tilted, and flipped, 3 full rolls like a discarded toy. Metal shrieked, doors burst open, glass shattered, screams echoed into a wilderness too vast to answer. Emma woke in pain. A searing bolt ran from her hip to her ankle. Her leg was broken. She whimpered, looked down, and saw her right leg twisted unnaturally. Half the vehicle was buried in sand. A few people had minor injuries. 2 others were trying to call for rescue, but the radio was dead, too far from stable satellite range. Emma tried to stay calm, but when she glanced toward the horizon, her chest tightened. The sky was deep orange. Night was coming. She leaned against the wrecked frame, clutching a makeshift splint against her leg, while 2 teammates climbed to higher ground in search of signal. Alone in the vast silence, the wind faded, and something else rose. A growl, not loud, but low, deep, enough to chill her to the bone. She looked up. About 30 meters away stood a full-grown male lion, completely still. Its golden black eyes locked onto hers, tall, muscular, its mane wild in the wind, whiskers twitching with every breath. No one else was around. Just Emma. And him. She couldn't run. She had no weapon. She stared, clutching her pants leg, heart pounding like a war drum. And then, the unthinkable happened. The lion walked toward her, slowly, silently. No threatening growl, no tension, just quiet purpose. When he was no more than 10 feet away, he stopped, lowered his head, gently rubbed it against her hand. Emma froze. That gaze, that touch. "Leo," she whispered, barely audible. He looked up at her, and in that moment the world disappeared, just the 2 of them, still tethered by something no one else could see. A woman who once saved a fragile life, and a wild creature who never forgot. But the moment shattered, pierced by an eerie chorus in the distance, low growls and high-pitched cackling laughter. A pack of hyenas. They'd caught the scent of blood. Emma's injured leg, and the scattered remains of small creatures the sandstorm had felled along the way. They crept closer, 6, then 7 of them. Golden eyes glinting in the twilight, fangs bared, growls stretching into the dusk. 1 wounded human, 1 lone male lion. In their minds, it was an opportunity. Leo rose to his feet and did something that would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about human-animal bonds. His body tensed, muscles rippling beneath his fur, and then he roared. The sound tore through the air like a tremor from deep underground. Not the roar of a solitary beast, but a fierce declaration of dominance. of protection, of defiance. The hyenas froze. Their advance halted mid-prowl. Some flinched, eyes darting, but two remained, bolder, hungrier, stepping forward with slow, deliberate menace, paws pressing into the sand like a dare. Leo didn't budge. He charged, a blur of muscle and fury, then came to a sudden halt in front of Emma, planting himself like a living wall. His tail lashed the ground, flinging up a cloud of dust that rose like a barrier between them and the predators. The second roar erupted, closer, sharper, aimed directly into the face of the lead hyena trying to flank. It froze, eyes quivering. One breath later, it backed away. The second one looked around. The pack, usually its safety, was now a scattering of nervous shadows. One turned, then another. Within seconds, the entire pack had vanished into the darkness as if they'd never been there at all. Only Leo remained, chest heaving, eyes watchful, surrounded by silence. He turned back to Emma. Her tears spilled, not from fear, but from something far deeper. Gratitude, trust, and a memory she knew would never leave her. 2 hours later, the rescue team found them, led by an emergency signal sent just before the storm hit. Emma was lifted onto a stretcher. Leo followed quietly all the way to the edge of the field medical station. A veterinarian noticed a faint scar on the lion's rear leg. Strange coincidence. Looks like a healed fracture, he murmured. Emma just smiled. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The next day, the first photos were released by the rescue team, images of a fully grown male lion bowing his head beside an injured woman, as if guarding her, comforting her. Just one photo, but the world stood still. It had all happened so quickly, but the memory, that would last a lifetime. And this time, it wasn't Emma telling the story. The world shared it on its own. A lion saved the life of the woman who once saved his. International media called it a miracle in the wild, living proof of the sacred bond between humans and nature. Conservation groups, research institutions, even schools began sharing the story as a powerful example of bioethics, of connection, of trust. Emma returned to the U.S. a few weeks later, her leg in a cast, but her spirit stronger than ever. In interviews, when asked why she risked her life for an animal she had helped 10 years earlier, Emma only smiled and said, "I didn't think much about it. I just knew. If I walked away, I might lose a part of myself forever." And when asked how it felt to be saved by that same animal, her voice slowed. "I never expected it, but Leo remembered, and that alone is enough for me to believe. Kindness has a memory of its own." Leo didn't return to camp. As soon as the rescue team arrived, he slipped away into the grasslands, disappearing like a shadow. No tags, no trackers, no interference. He came in his own way, and left the only way he knew how, wild and free. Today, when Emma stands before students, communities, and the world, she always ends her talks with the same words, a truth she learned from the savanna and from a small life that grew up wild and returned with loyalty. Sometimes, kindness doesn't need to be returned right away. It doesn't seek applause. It doesn't wait for recognition. But like a seed quietly planted in dry soil, it takes root in silence, waiting for rain. And then, in the moment you least expect it, in rushing waters, in the eyes of something that once seemed untamable, that kindness blooms into something close to a miracle.